Oh, my goodness. We've got the Hall of Fame game Thursday night. We've got this 2 classes going in this weekend in Canton, Ohio. We've got an NFL Insider coming up here in just a second. All kinds of things going on. The Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. We'll also get to, let's go ahead and lead with the LSU deal. And then we'll ask Mike about Peyton Manning and Jimmy Johnson, and then we'll get into the Saints. I don't know if we'll get all that in 20 minutes, but we'll just see where it all goes. LSU opens up with UCLA. LSU is better. We know that. But the game's at UCLA, and they return a ton on offense. A guy named Dorian Thompson-Robinson is going to be their returning QB. Had some really good numbers. Only played 5 games last year because the Pac-12 couldn't get out of their own way. But they like him. Chip Kelly's good on offense, and LSU will travel to Los Angeles without a super young man in Miles Brennan, who we hope has a speedy recovery. He's been the dude that's grinded it out and stayed the course. Was playing really well last year before he went down. He's from Mississippi. We know his family, some of them who live here. And Miles Brennan goes down with a broken arm. Mike Detillier, WWL Radio, TV New Orleans. Mike joins us on the Modelo guest line. That's a big blow, Mike. Whether he was going to start or not, the depth and all that. Talk about Miles Brennan going down for at least a while.
Yeah, I mean, I feel horrible for Mac. I'll be honest with you. Man, Miles has really worked hard to get to this point. Just like he did last year, gets a freak injury, and misses basically 3/4 of the season. And then, to have this happen. And so, man, listen, that's difficult. But, for Miles, he'll bounce back. He's a talented player. Whatever happens in his future, I mean, I wish him the best because I know how hard he's worked at this, really has. And he has stayed there when he could have easily left, went somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's Max's job. At this point, I don't think there's any question. There'll be no debate now. I mean, it's Max Johnson. And he's a very poised young man. We had his father on, Brad, about a week and a half on WWL with us. And he was like, whatever happens, Max is going to be ready. If he wins the job, if something happens that he's the backup, he's ready. And it's funny how you just never know in life. You get that opportunity and you seize the moment. I do know one thing. These guys believe in Max. They know he's a really good leader. They saw what happened last year. He brings an element to the table as a runner that wasn't Miles's forte. He was basically a pro-style pocket passer. Mm-hmm. Max is a guy that'll take off and run with it. Now, we'll say this. If anybody touches him in the fall drills, dude, you off the team for life. As far as I'm concerned, I'm building a bubble around him. And if anybody touches him, other than an opposing player in a game, man, you will never put on that jersey again. So, again, I feel really bad for Miles and how it happened. Life has got a lot of strange twists and turns to it. It really has for Max over the last year. I mean, some really strange twists. And so now it's all on the back of Max Johnson. And I think really what this shows, and this is something Jimbo Fisher told me earlier this year, hey, look, they're going to have teams like this. You're going to have an injury or a suspension, and quarterbacks, you're not going to have 4 deep on every team. Look at LSU. They were 3 deep. Now they're 2 deep. And the backup is Garrett Nussmeier, a true freshman. They almost in the same – they say lightning don't strike in the same place twice. Well, if you live in the country, that's a bunch of hish-hosh because that does happen. Now, if something would happen to Max, you got to pass the baton to Garrett Nussmeier. He is the only other scholarship quarterback on this roster.
All right. So Miles Brennan down for a while. And Max Johnson will be the starter against UCLA and for several weeks, maybe the whole season. Mike Detillier joining us on the Modelo guest line. Mike, let's switch gears. Big weekend in Canton, Ohio. Pro Football Hall of Fame. I want to start with the guy that grew up in your backyard, Peyton Manning. Just his impact on the league, his career. Archie Manning, his father, will be introducing him. What a special time and moment for the Manning family this weekend as someone you've covered since probably he was in junior high or high school, Peyton Manning into the Hall of Fame.
Well, I tell him I knew him long before he was in junior high. So, but man, he's one of the most focused people I've seen in life at his profession. He basically, his life revolved around football, 24/7, 365. That was his main interest in life, and I think while it may not be at the same level today, it's pretty doggone close. There are guys that had a stronger arm. There are guys. Now he's a big man, and you saw right off the bat with him as a high school player how accurate he was. But it was his approach to the game that he was always going to give everything he had, come fully prepared, and that was just going to be his way to success. And that was it. Now, sometimes he's a pain in the yacht because he thinks you should be doing what he's doing.
Right.
And not all players are like that. And I've even had some coaches tell me he drove them up the wall because he was never satisfied with the amount of information that they could supply him. He always wanted more. And I think that's led to his success. I think that tremendous focus and dedication to his craft. A lot of times people say they do it, but they don't. Mm-hmm. There are very few people that can hit the high notes in that category like Peyton Manning did. And he was a competitor. And also he was carrying the weight of that Manning name. Okay, Cooper played another position. Peyton played quarterback, just like his pop. And so he was caught in that weight that went along with it. You'd have never known. I think in life, he has probably been told as a kid, you'll never be as good as your dad. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's a terrible thing to say. But, boy, they got people like that in this world. They do really have a lot of stupid people and people who really could care less about anything but themselves. And I'm sure he heard that. You'll never be as good as your dad. You don't think that motivated him to say, hey, I'm going to show you just how good I am? Because they do have mean people in this world. And he went out and showed you, I'm going to show you just how good I am.
Hey, Mike, don't you think he also had a chip on his shoulder for his father, Archie, because he felt like Archie was robbed of a really good professional career because the Saints were not well run during that time, and he wanted to kind of somewhat make that right if he could, Mike?
That part I don't know. Only he could answer that, and he'd probably tell you no. I'm not sure he passed the lie detector test on that. I remember an interview, Kenny Berthelot, who's a friend of mine, and this is a 6, 7, 8-year-old Peyton Manning, and they asked him, who's your favorite player? Now, he's decked out with a Saints uniform and Saints helmet, everything else, and he says, Roger Staubach. And, Archie's laughing, and he said, I think he's about right about that. And, it is what it is, and I don't think you can do anything about somebody's legacy because he always also heard the other part about what he did at Ole Miss, of what his dad was to Mississippi football. And so I just think it's sometimes just carrying the weight of your father or your name with him good or bad. And he carried it. And to make that decision to go to Tennessee, and he knew, his dad and mom were going to take some heat for it. And to play early like he did because of an injury, you just never know. And, we go back to the Max Johnson situation about you just never know how you're going to get that chance. And he made the most of it. And, he's one of the greatest college players over the last, 30 years.
Oh, yeah.
In college football.
Oh, yeah.
And
he played in a conservative offense, Mike. I mean, if he played in Joe Brady, Lane Kiffin, Sark.
Oh, my God.
Yes.
The numbers would be astronomical of what he would have put up. But the other thing is he was a better pro player than he was a college player.
Yes.
And that is impressive because he was one whale of a college player, and then he goes to the NFL and he becomes one of the all-time greats at that position. And I think you always need a competitor. You always need a guy that, okay, I'm going to get in the ring with you. And we all remember, say like Muhammad Ali, we all remember he had one in Joe Frazier. Okay, Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer. You remember that other guy that was going to push you, and it was Tom Brady. And there was competitiveness between the two because neither one, I think, would admit it, but they both the same in a lot of ways. And I heard Brady make this comment when they did the little Manning special, that he said, one thing we do have when we'll always share is those moments in life. And there aren't, those competitors always have those special moments in the toughest times, in the biggest games, in the hottest moments, so to speak, that you went up against the best and squared off against him. And you share that moment. You share it with them until they put you in the grave. And so there won't be a lot of discussion about Peyton Manning without Tom Brady's name coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same with Tom, without Peyton Manning's name coming up. Interesting. But that's what great players at the same position or the same sport, I think, all have in common.
He is Mike Detillier, NFL insider, WWL Radio New Orleans. He joins us on the Modelo guest line. Peyton Manning going into the Hall of Fame this weekend. The show is brought to you by Sound and Communications, the leader in top quality audio visual systems. SoundcomAV.com. Mike, we got to hit Jimmy Johnson. He's one of my favorite coaches of all time. He's going in this weekend. I love what he did at Oklahoma State, Miami, Dallas, so on. Just talk a little bit. You've been covering the game forever. His impact and the kind of Herculean effort that he put into rebuilding the Dallas Cowboys. Mike.
He changed the game forever. One, he changed this from a big man world on defense to a speed, quickness, formation world. Exactly what he did in college, he brought to the NFL. Everybody tried to copycat it, to have these guys that could flow the football quickly, pressure, be able to cover. That's what, he brought to the NFL as a college coach, never coached in the pros before, and he was able to make it work. That draft chart about trading players that he came up with is still used today. Jimmy will go down as one of the all-time great coaches, but also one of the all-time what-ifs of the world.
Yep.
What if him and Jerry could have gotten along better? Back-to-back Super Bowls, that roster they built, what could have been? That's always part of life when something is kind of missing or gets taken away or it changes quickly. But Jimmy's a brilliant defensive coach. Today, what people I think some people know, maybe not everybody, is now owners and coaches go to him.
Yes.
They go on the boat with him and talk football. They talk about players. They talk about coaches. They talk about schemes, everything else. That Jimmy has become the guy behind the curtain, in the Wizard of Oz, so to speak. I'm going to find out something. And Jimmy is still that guy today. And I'll never forget, Ed Orgeron gets a job as a defensive line coach at Miami of Florida. So he calls me up, "Hey, T-Boy, I just got the line coach job." I said, "Where at?" He said, "Miami of Florida. I'm working for Jimmy Johnson." And after a few months, he said, "Mike, never happened before in my life. Every day, man, I can't wait to hear Jimmy talk to the team. He's the greatest motivator I've ever seen in my life." And Ed still talks about that today, his motivation skills. And he said, a lot of times I think about, what would Jimmy say in this situation? And, Ed's close to Pete Carroll, and Pete was really the guy that basically put the key in the ignition for him to become the head coach at LSU in that phone call to Joe Oliva when they were looking around. But he still talks about Jimmy. Still talks about how Jimmy changed the way he thought about coaching, motivation, getting players ready to play. And he always says, "I've never been to a practice as a game as I was at Miami. Those practices," he said, "are etched in my mind." He said, "We don't practice that way anymore." But how tough Jimmy made those practices, and it made game day so easy. Those players, well, man, game day is nothing. It's surviving the practice. How much he pushed them and motivated them to be the very best. And what he did to take over for a program, okay, Snellenberger had unbelievable success to build that program. Mm-hmm. Jimmy took it 2 levels bigger than that. And that's, to me, his college football legacy of what he was able to do. Not a lot of guys can step in those moccasins. And Jimmy was considered an outsider. He was the guy. He's the outsider coming in here because a lot of people wanted Oliveri to be the coach, who was the defensive coordinator. They went out and hired Jimmy. And it was late. Snellenberger left late in the process once he took over, or he was going to be the coach of a team that never happened.
Right.
In USFL. But, Jimmy took over that team with the same staff as Snellenberger, which he didn't like. He wanted to bring in his own guys. Had a difficult first year, but then after that, man, you didn't want to see that hurricane stuff on your schedule.
No.
They made it difficult. And just, to me, a brilliant mind, a guy always a forward thinker, never taking a look in the rearview mirror. And I think that's so important for so many people in life, is that you can't control yesterday. You can only control today and tomorrow. And I've heard Jimmy say that numerous times about that was his philosophy in life. You cannot do anything about yesterday, but you can do a lot about today and tomorrow. And I know even Coach O brings it up that, I try to bring some of the same things Jimmy would say. I try to do that, here at LSU, and how big of an influence he had on so many people.
Man, I still think he's underrated. I mean, I think after Belichick and Saban and maybe a couple others, you can start talking Jimmy Johnson with what he accomplished at Miami and with the Cowboys, and the fact, as you just talked about, not only was he so good at coaching and motivating, but, man, that guy, as a personnel guy in the NFL, he was playing chess while other people were playing checkers.
I know Ed would always tell me, we'd come in the room, we'd talk about players, and we had a little board. And he said, it's not like it is today, all this computerized stuff. He said, we were still using a chalkboard. And he said, we'd write players, and Jimmy would tell me about him. And I'm not – I understand how good of a high school player he is. How good can he be as a college player? So he said, we went and jumped from one part of evaluation to the next. He always had the final say. And he said, Mike, it was remarkable how once you kind of broke down a player, he knew whether to offer that guy a scholarship or not. And he said, as good as the guy he was on draft day, and we saw the success that he had in Dallas, he said, I really think he was a better college player evaluator than he was a pro guy. And he said, that's not a knock. That's telling you how good he was to figure out the player that would fit into what Miami and Florida was doing at that time. He said it was remarkable to be there in a room with him and you discuss personnel.
Best evaluator in the history of college football.
I think he's in that range of, if you put that Mount Rushmore up, it was a short run, but, man, that run at Miami was unbelievable in what he was able to accomplish.
Hey, and survive in Stillwater when Barry Switzer had it rolling, golly. I mean, that was a tough time to be there.
You the eighth of 9 children when you in Stillwater.
Yep.
And not saying that parents don't love the eighth of 9 children, but, you way in the back. And he was able to make it work at Oklahoma State. But, even they have coaches that I knew at Louisiana Tech when he was there, when he came in and installed his defense for a short period of time when he was at Louisiana Tech, that still talk about him, of how he made it work with talent that, wasn't great. And so it just is part of his legacy, how he was able to teach, get them understand, and all make it work. But he had a different philosophy than most coaches who wanted that huge defensive line, linebackers. He went with a much quicker back seven than anybody else at that time, and it worked. And now every team in the NFL tried to copycat it, every one of them.
It's unbelievable. When he hung it up, he was 56 years old, young. Well, Mike, that flew by. We'll get to the Saints next week. Mike Detillier on the Out of Bounds show and the Modelo guest line, WWL Radio TV, New Orleans. Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Thank you, bud.
The Out of Bounds show, 105.9 The Zone ESPN, is brought to you by Sound and Communications. Top quality, audio, visual, sound and communication. Soundcom offers leading edge audio and visual for churches, businesses, schools, junior colleges, you name it. Acoustics, audio, video conference room design, among many more things that they offer. SoundcomAV.com. Sound and Communication. SoundcomAV.com.